Friends, we're going to talk Bitcoin today. There's some big news floating around the Bitcoin space right now, and it's very timely. So I want you to picture the guy who did everything the right way, per the Bitcoiner handbook. They didn't leave their Bitcoin on an exchange, and they didn't trust their self-custody storage to the silly Ledger wallet that was so popular a few years back. Instead, they created a robust, air-gapped system with maximum security, and they linked it to their own Bitcoin node. That's the standard for personal sovereignty within Bitcoin. But AI, artificial intelligence, just blew a hole in it, at least in a small way. We're going to talk about what happened with that today, and we're going to talk about what the solution is. And at the same time, there's been some contention around the software development that looks something like a calmer, light version of the old block size wars, which I witnessed firsthand, step by step. We'll talk about what's happening there too today, and I'll share my experience during the block size wars with you. So let's get into it. Hello and welcome to episode 17 of the Phoenician League podcast. I'm your host, Joe Withrow. Okay, so we have big news in the Bitcoin space to talk about today. There are a couple things of note, both a major bug and a software showdown. And it reminds me of what I saw back during the block size wars. I'll share that story with you. But the big story first comes from the hardware wallet Coldcard. This is a robust Bitcoin-only piece of hardware that many sophisticated Bitcoiners used for self-custody. I migrated my setup over to Coldcard earlier this year also. But news just broke that Coldcard's firmware had a critical bug that caused the device to generate a weak set of private keys when you set up a new wallet using it. Now, we don't need to go into the technical details, but just know that the private keys are what represent your ownership of the wallet and the Bitcoin's in it. So whoever has the private keys is who can spend the Bitcoin in the wallet. Your private keys are secured by your wallet's seed words, which are 24 words or so in a specific order that are supposed to be generated randomly, such that it would be virtually impossible to guess them and get the order right at the same time. But the Coldcard bug caused the hardware to choose from a limited range of seed words when setting up a new wallet. And then an AI discovered that bug, and somebody used an AI to identify the wallets with the weak seed words and to start cracking them. And I believe they stole somewhere around 2,000 Bitcoins this way. So word about the bug started to go around on Thursday. It's been over a week ago now. But it was a Thursday, and it looked like it was just an older hardware model that was impacted. By Friday morning, all that buzz was that Coldcard used all Coldcard devices used within a certain date range, I think since 2021, were impacted. So needless to say, I had to drop everything I was doing to rush to move my Bitcoins right on the spot. Man, talk about nervous. Loading up the wallet, I was just hoping I didn't see a bunch of zeros. And fortunately, I did. All my Bitcoin was still there, and I moved it to safety. But I'll tell you, I'm sweating a little bit. Now, I think around 2,000 Bitcoin were stolen, and I feel for the people who were impacted. Doubly so because they had what should have been the hardest security setup around. It should have been impenetrable. It takes some extra work to set up the type of air-gap system that the Coldcard entailed, and it was a little bit more tedious than just a regular hardware wallet. So they did everything the right way. Hats off to the folks impacted. But I feel terrible for them because I can only imagine what that feels like to see your wallet drained. All right, so let's talk about what a genuinely solid self-custody setup looks like today. I had a great conversation recently with Wes Slimmer, who runs the Bitcoin Day Foundation down in Tampa, and he's plugged into all the comings and goings of Bitcoin. So Wes recommended a specific setup to us at our recent Phoenician League members call. He suggested using the Phoenix wallet on the phone, kind of for walking around money, meaning, you keep a little change on your phone, so you always have some Bitcoin on your person. But for your serious Bitcoin reserves, Wes likes the SeedSigner hardware piece, and he pairs that with the Sparrow Wallet on the computer. And the beauty there is that the Sparrow Wallet, when set up this way, it's watch only. So it can only monitor your wallet and any transactions that come in. And it can connect directly to your personal Bitcoin node as well if you have one, which that gives you an extra degree of privacy. It's a great thing to do. But the Sparrow Wallet, it cannot sign any transactions, not when using this type of setup. So if you want to send Bitcoin out of the wallet, you need a SeedSigner, right? Which never connects to the internet. So it's just this hardware device, and it can communicate with the Sparrow Wallet through QR codes. So it's really not that difficult to use, but it is a little more complex than normal. But that setup gives you resiliency. If somebody gets the password to your Sparrow Wallet, they can't take your Bitcoin unless they also get the physical SeedSigner device. Now, I won't bore everybody by explaining how to set it all up here, but just shoot me an email and I can point you in the right direction if you're interested in going down that road. And if you don't have my email address, you can get it by signing up for our email list at PhoenicianLeague.com. But here's the thing. This is largely the same setup that I had with the Cold Card. The difference is the SeedSigner did not have the same software bug. So the Cold Card is a similar piece of hardware. It kind of looks like this old-timey calculator. There's nothing wrong with the hardware. It was the software bug, the bug in the firmware that was the problem. But I'm told that if you set your own seed words using a certain technique, then the Cold Card device can be just as bulletproof, right? So you don't allow the Cold Card to set your own seed words. You can choose them yourself, and there's ways to go about that to make sure it's extremely secure. All right, so you just have to generate your own private keys in the right way if you're using the Cold Card. And again, we're happy to provide more guidance on all this. Just shoot me an email if you like. But for today, I want to emphasize something that I think is important. Bitcoin was created to be peer-to-peer digital cash. It was made to be used, right? Somewhere along the way, we got these memes like HODL, hold on for dear life. And then the term diamond hands came about, which refers to holding Bitcoin and never selling it, no matter how vicious the price swings might be. And then we also got the stupid to the moon and win Lambo memes, and that was a number of years back. And I think those largely died when FTX died, and I'm thankful for that. But I do agree with the part about never selling Bitcoin. I've been in Bitcoin since 2014, and I've never sold any. But I love to use Bitcoin. I love to send people Bitcoin whenever I can. Whether that's to buy something or just as a tip. If you actually use it, you'll see that Bitcoin is an amazing technology. And here's what's beautiful about that. I could send you $1 or $1 million worth of Bitcoin at any time for any reason, and there's nothing anyone could do to stop that transaction from happening. And if we were smart about it by using the right wallets, nobody would even know that it happened, or they wouldn't know that it was us making that transaction. And I mean that. I've sent Bitcoin to people on Christmas morning before, when the rest of the world is basically shut down. Bitcoin doesn't care about holidays. It doesn't care about nights. It doesn't care about weekends. The network runs 24/7, just as it was designed to do. And guys, it's a brilliant design. If you have not studied how Bitcoin actually works, you really should. The reason I got excited about Bitcoin in 2014 is because I studied the mechanics of how the network works. And the reason I've held Bitcoin through multiple 90% plus drawdowns, meaning the price fell 90%. And I never sold anything. I didn't care. I bought more. But the reason I had that conviction never to let Bitcoin go is because I studied how the network works. And I have the utmost confidence in it. So for me, I learned about the mechanics through a book titled The Book of Satoshi by a guy named Phil Champagne. Now, I don't know who Phil is, but I owe him a debt of gratitude because that book got my mind right. And I just checked. The book is still available on Amazon today. I suspect there may be other books that are just as good out there now too, maybe more recent. This one is from back in the day, but I think it does the trick quite nicely. But I always make the point, when I talk about Bitcoin, it is to be used. It's sovereign money, sound money, money that cannot be inflated. I enjoy having conversations with people I meet about it. And really, I'd like to see, in certain situations, if we can do commerce with Bitcoin. But these days, any merchant who uses a Square terminal can accept payments in Bitcoin. If you buy anything from someone with the Square terminal, and typically that's going to be, kind of smaller, mid-sized businesses, check to see if they have the Bitcoin option turned on. Because if all the merchants turn on the ability to accept Bitcoin on their Square terminal, suddenly we'll be able to buy all kinds of things with Bitcoin without ever having to have even a conversation about it. And if you do buy something with Bitcoin, what's the first thing you should do afterwards? Go buy the exact same amount of Bitcoin back to replenish your stash, right? The Bitcoin Bay Foundation has set a great example for how this is done. I believe they have over 1,300 merchants in Tampa Bay that now accept Bitcoin as payments for goods and services. And they even have this big ranch down there that's on board. So you can buy local beef in Bitcoin. So doing this creates a circular economy of sorts where people really can live on Bitcoin if they want to. And that helps a local economy stay insulated from really any externalities that might be adversarial. So this brings me to something with real timing to it. 9 years ago, on August 1st, 2017, something happened that I see some people in Bitcoin calling Bitcoin Independence Day. And that was the day of the User Activated Soft Fork, or UASF. It's the day that a contingent of people in Bitcoin forced through a software change called Segregated Witness, or SegWit, which fundamentally changed how Bitcoin transactions were handled. Well, there's a similar software struggle that's been playing out recently. It's not nearly as consequential as what happened in 2017, but it is similar in that the fight is over how much data can be added into Bitcoin's blocks. And we don't need to go into the technical details of this. They're really not important for our purposes. I bring it up mainly because it kind of brought back memories of the block size war for me. And I had a front row seat back then in 2016, 2017. And I can tell you the story that's presented to Bitcoiners today, it's a whitewashed version of history. So I was running 2 Antminer S9 mining rigs on solar power back then, right? And because of that, I was tracking everything that was going on. And now don't get me wrong. With 2 little mining rigs, I was very insignificant. But I did have a voice because your hash power is your voice. And I had some hash power. So what I think gets glossed over is the fact that anyone can run a mining rig. But if you're just running a rig or 2 like I was, you're probably never going to actually mine any Bitcoin because you're competing against a massive amount of computing power that's already out there. So instead of mining for yourself, you join a mining pool. And that's where you pool your miner's hash power with other people, which gives the pool a better chance to mine Bitcoins. And when the pool does mine a block, it shares the Bitcoins with everyone in proportion to how much hash power each person contributed. So now I'm out of touch with this stuff today. I haven't kept up with what's going on in that world, but I knew it intimately back in 2016 and 2017. So here's a major mischaracterization that I see fairly frequently, especially when somebody talks about UASF or Bitcoin Independence Day, right? The folks talking about it, they usually weren't there. They didn't see it live. They weren't in Bitcoin at that time. So they're just repeating the story that they were told or the story that they read about the situation, right? And that story paints it as a fight between users and decentralization against these greedy, evil mining corporations that want to decentralize Bitcoin. So the users are the valiant heroes in this story, and the miners are the evil villains. Guys, that's just flat wrong on so many levels. Reality is far more nuanced. I can tell you with certainty that there were good people with good intentions on both sides of the fence. I can also tell you there were some not so good people with self-serving motivations on both sides of the fence too. It was not at all clean. But we kind of knew where the conflicts of interest were on each side. And, that made the waters very muddy. But the idea that mining companies were fighting for centralization, that's really just absurd to me. Because as I described, their pools consisted of users, right? They consisted of people like me. I had to choose which mining pool I wanted to contribute my hash power to. And I could switch at a moment's notice. So if one company did something that I didn't like, I could bail immediately and they would lose my hash power. Now, they wouldn't care much if it was just me. But if 1,000 of us bailed, that would be a problem for them. Now, that's not to say that the mining companies did not have self-serving motives. I believe they did. At least a few of them did. But I don't think their motives were to capture Bitcoin. So it was up to those of us running mining rigs to judge those motives and the trustworthiness of the mining pools, and then to choose which pools that we supported with our hash power. That in and of itself created some element of decentralization, at least to a degree, and it enshrined market-based incentives into the dynamic. Mining pools knew this. They knew that they couldn't get out of line or they would lose a significant amount of hash power. And here's why that mattered. The mining companies used their hash power to signal for or against the Bitcoin software development changes that are proposed. If the developers want to push a change out to the entire network, they want to update Bitcoin, the miners choose to either accept or reject it. And so whoever controlled the majority of the hash power, the computing power pointed toward mining, right? And this would be pools collectively, not a single pool, but whatever the majority of the hash power signaled for, that's what was going to decide what changes did or did not happen. All right. So as the block size wars heated up, the mining pools started to pick sides. Some announced themselves as 100% in the small block camp, and they would use their hash power to signal for those changes, right? And that's the UASF, or the Bitcoin Independence Day side. Other pools announced 100% for the big block camp. That's the side they painted as corporate stooges and villains. But most of them passionately believed that big blocks were the key to unlocking the Bitcoin vision of peer-to-peer digital cash that could become a global medium of exchange, right? To be used in real transactions. And then there were some pools that they were just largely on the fence. They said they'd support whichever side came out on top. So let me try to summarize each camp for you as best I can. And I'm going to oversimplify here, but these are just a high-level summary. The small block camp's argument was, if you let Bitcoin's blocks get bigger, the data is going to get too heavy, and regular people won't be able to run a full node anymore, right? So only big, well-funded corporations will be able to afford the storage and the bandwidth to run a node. And if only the big players can run nodes, then they said, you centralize the network, which in their view defeated the entire purpose. They also talked a lot about Bitcoin security and about how increasing the block size would make security more difficult to ensure. Now, when we talk about blocks getting bigger, that roughly refers to how many transactions can be processed at one time. Again, I'm oversimplifying here, but the bigger the blocks, the more transactions can go through. Okay, so the big block camp's argument was that if we wanted Bitcoin to be used for transactions per Satoshi's original vision of peer-to-peer digital cash, then it had to scale. Right? Under the block size restriction, Bitcoin could only process, I think it was 7 transactions a second. I think that's still the case today on chain. And that's just not enough to handle a world where people started using Bitcoin daily. Thus, they said the block size needed to increase so Bitcoin could handle more transactions more efficiently. So personally, I was following everything and trying to figure out which side I agreed with, because I thought both sides made some good points, and I thought both sides made some points that were really not that relevant. And so on the small block side, I thought their argument about the Bitcoin network security was a good one. Now, I'm not technical enough to know if they were right about the big risk, but it did make sense to me that we should think about security first and foremost. Now, their idea that nobody would be able to run their own node if the block size increased, that was, I think that was largely wrong, at least as it pertains to the original block size increase that was proposed through SegWit 2x. And that's because memory technology has become so much more efficient over the last decade that I don't think it's a concern today. It doesn't cost as much to handle, 1, 2, 5, 10 terabytes of data as it did back then. And then, also that their idea that somehow everybody running their own node was critically important, I don't think that was a very, very good one either. I don't think that's accurate. Now, I do run a node because I value the extra privacy it gives me. But Bitcoin is robust enough that it doesn't need everybody running a node. And most people just aren't going to. That's true of any system. Most people are not going to do the most advanced thing. They just want to use it. And so, I didn't think that held as much weight. But on the security concerns, the small block argument made some sense to me. Now, on the big block side, I was well aware of how constricted the blocks had become. I was working in the investment research world at the time. They had hired me actually largely because of my knowledge of Bitcoin. So I would talk about it a lot. And I gave a few presentations on Bitcoin to this large company. And then I would do the Roger Ver thing. I would set people up with a wallet. Anybody who stuck around to talk and seemed interested, I'd set them up with a wallet and I'd send them a small amount of Bitcoin. And the whole point of doing that, it wasn't really about, it wasn't to give people Bitcoin. It was about showing people how easy it was to send Bitcoin, how I could send Bitcoin to them directly. They could get it right on their phone, right there, with no company or central party in the picture, no needing to go into a bank, no needing any type of intermediary whatsoever, permissionless transactions. That was the beauty. And it was beautiful at first anyway. I would make the transaction and it would cost me maybe a few cents in transaction fees. And then the person I was sending Bitcoin to, they'd see it hit their wallet instantly. And, usually, depending on the wallet, it'd make a little noise. And to see people's face, it generally is, when you first experience it, it is amazing, especially back then. And so it wasn't that long ago, but, this was really mind-blowing to a lot of people. All right, but after the big price spike of 2017, suddenly the network became congested. And I tried to do my little spiel when we had some out-of-town IT folks in the office, and they hadn't seen it before, but it didn't work, right? So I was talking to them about it, and I was hyping it up as I would do, and I'm talking about how amazing, and we could transact, and we don't need any banks. We can just be, no government involvement, no third-party intermediaries, nothing. And so I get them set up with the wallet, and then I go to send them the Bitcoin, right? And I scan their QR code, and I get the transaction, I hit it, and I see transaction fee was like $50. Might even have been more than that. Like $50. And I'm just trying to send maybe $25 worth of Bitcoin. And the transaction fee is $50. I'm like, oh, but I'm already in it, right? So I can't stop. So I sent the transaction, right? But the blocks were so full that the transaction, it took like a couple days to clear. So we're standing there and I'm like, yeah, and it's going to hit any minute. And I'm like, okay, we'll just give it some time. Network's a little congested right now. Transactions are slow. Just give it some time. And, maybe after 5, 6, 10 minutes, finally like, well, just check it a little later. It'll be there, I promise. And so with that, it takes all the magic away, right? And naturally, these guys were like, Joe, what are you getting us into here? Something's up with this, man. This is not at all what you portrayed it as, right? So that's a problem. I mean, you can't have that and expect to have a working system for transacting value in the real world. So it was clear to me that the block size probably needed to increase, right? And so, anyway, I liked the elements of both sides. And at first, there was what looked to be a great compromise in place, at least in my assessment. And the compromise was that the big block camp would let the SegWit update go through. This is what the small block guys wanted. Then the small block camp would agree to a one-time increase of the block size. And they'd allow the block size to double from a very small place, one time. And that seemed reasonable to me. The small block people wanted SegWit because it made the blocks more efficient and because it would enable the Lightning Network. Right? And then the big block camp, they would get what they wanted in a block size increase. So more transactions could fit into a block. Now, the SegWit part moved right along as planned. But then the small block camp, they largely reneged on their agreement to allow a one-time block size increase. Now, I know not all of them agreed to this, but there was some type of working compromise in place. They got SegWit through, and then they refused to allow the block size to increase per the original proposal that was on the table. Now, what's more, a contingent within the small block camp started behaving more like Antifa than sound money Bitcoiners. Right? They began screeching about the big block people, saying they were trying to destroy Bitcoin. And I noticed that they began actively censoring discussions on the forums that were controlled by small block people. Right? They would not allow the big block ideas to be voiced organically online. They would only allow the big block side to be painted as evil, right? As ideas from regulated corporations that were trying to centralize Bitcoin. Right? They did a very good job of painting and controlling that narrative. Now, Roger Ver documented all this in his book, Hijacking Bitcoin. And I saw it firsthand, or at least I saw some of it, a snapshot of it. Now, I think it was only a small subset of the small block people that were behaving this way, but the UASF movement was the epitome of this Antifa-like behavior. For starters, the UASF guys, they were the ones screeching the loudest and being the most unreasonable, at least from what I can recall. And then these guys stormed into a conference where some discussions, some negotiations were happening between the two camps. And they were all wearing the same stupid camouflage UASF hat. And they started carrying on, causing a scene and disrupting everything. I was watching it. It looked like a chimpanzee tribe to me. And I'm sorry for the derogatory statement there, but that's exactly what it looked like. I mean, these guys could have been Bernie Sanders or Mamdani brown shirts, and it would have looked the exact same. So if I'm being honest, I suspect that was a small color revolution in evidence. Right? And in hindsight, it fit the bill of a coordinated divide and conquer operation. But we didn't understand the nature of such things back then. So that's why I'm perturbed whenever I see the history of the block size wars being misrepresented and painting the UASF people as the heroes. Because in my view, they were the exact opposite. And without them, we probably would have gotten a better compromise that may have worked for both camps. And instead, we got a hard fork that created Bitcoin Cash, and it splintered the network. And a lot of high caliber people followed Bitcoin Cash. And so, I think that the compromise on the table, I think, would have been preferable. That's just my opinion. But guess what? When Bitcoin Cash forked, the same guys refused to call it by that name. They would only call it Bcash. And again, that struck me as very childish. It was tribal-like behavior. I mean, Bitcoin is supposed to be the purest expression of what we call capitalism, right? Where everything is supposed to kind of sink or swim based on its own merits of being able to serve the marketplace effectively. Yet these guys were acting really like communist revolutionaries. They were engaging in censorship and word games, and it was all in an effort to misdirect people and to prevent an honest assessment of competing ideas and systems. So from my perspective, the block size war was not at all cut and dry. There were good and not so good arguments on each side, and there were good and not so good people on each side too. But I can tell you this, August 1st, 2017 was not at all Bitcoin Independence Day. That's a major mischaracterization, and it completely misrepresents what Bitcoin is about. I would suggest to you that pointing to the Genesis block as Bitcoin's, that's Bitcoin's Independence Day. In it, the Genesis block, the first block ever mined, Satoshi transcribed the following message. He said, "The Times, January 3, 2009, Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks." Guys, that's what Bitcoin represents. It's a self-sovereign system that is not owned or controlled by anybody. It's a transparent system in which there are no insiders and nobody who can change the rules unilaterally. It's not a perfect system. We saw that during the block size wars, and with this most recent spat between Core and Knots, or the BIP 110 thing, we can see that it's not perfect, but still Bitcoin is a beautiful system if we understand and use it as designed. Okay, having said all that, I'll leave you with a few takeaways today. At this point, it's clear to me that Bitcoin is not going to be used as peer-to-peer digital cash on a level that competes with the fiat system. And if I'm thinking as an objective analyst, I doubt that would be different even if the big block camp had won the block size war. Instead, it looks to me like Bitcoin will be integrating at the settlement layer of the global financial system. I think it's going to become a pristine collateral for large-scale trade and commerce. And hey, I think that's a fine use case for Bitcoin. And it will push the dollar price dramatically higher. Still, that's not the vision that got us so excited back in the day. I shared in episode 9 that I got into Bitcoin in 2014 because we saw it as kind of an end run around the Federal Reserve and around the fiat monetary system. But here's the thing. There's nothing stopping us from using Bitcoin that way at the local level. And that's exactly what my friend Wes at the Bitcoin Bay Foundation is doing in Tampa. And we can each do the same thing. When we buy something from a small business using the Square terminal, let's see if they have the Bitcoin payment option turned on. When we buy something from a local merchant, let's talk to them about Bitcoin, right? When we are sending money to a friend or a family for whatever reason, can we do it in Bitcoin? When we tip somebody for a service, would they accept their tip in Bitcoin? We can still enact that original vision, at the local level. At the larger macroeconomic level, I think Bitcoin's gone in a different direction. And that's okay. Because what happens on the local level is ultimately what's important. And that's what we can control. So I'm reminded of what Thomas Paine wrote back in 1776. We have it in our power to begin the world over again. With that, I'll see you again next week. That's going to do it for today's episode of the Phoenician League. If you found any value in today's conversation, please subscribe to stay plugged into the network. We put out new episodes every week. And if something we talked about today made you think differently about money or investing, please leave a review and let us know. That helps the show reach the people who could really benefit from it. And remember, financial freedom does not start with money. It starts with understanding and a fiercely independent mindset. So if you would like to dive deeper into the topics we cover, I invite you to get on the Phoenician League email distribution list at PhoenicianLeague.com. We often send out detailed written analysis on the various investment opportunities in the asset classes that we advocate, and we connect the dots across what's actually happening in the global economy. And then we host online strategy sessions periodically as well, where we can really drill into how to take full command of your financial future. So stay connected at PhoenicianLeague.com. And until next time, let's stay smart and let's stay independent. This is Joe Withrow, signing out.